Lottie Kiyatade, daughter of a Laguna Pueblo leader, was photographed around 1905. She wears the Kawake outfit with a belt and beaded necklaces, signaling ritual roles. The scene is set in the semi-arid central western region of New Mexico near Albuquerque, at a time when railroad expansion was connecting native villages to regional and national markets. An image from 1908, attributed to Roland Reed, portrays an Ojibwa woman. At the turn of the 20th century, the Ojibwa lived around the Great Lakes, following seasonal cycles of fishing and gathering, as well as birch bark and beadwork crafts. The photo records cultural continuity in the face of modern technology. Don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching us from. Carl Werntz's 1900 photograph in Arizona shows two young Hopi women by a window. The hair whirls, a hairstyle for unmarried girls, mark age and social position. At the turn of the century, villages on the mesas of the Colorado Plateau received artists, traders, and tourists brought by the railroad. Their gaze follows the approaching presence. A photograph from 1878 at Fort Keogh, Montana Territory, shows a Cheyenne woman. The post, built after Little Bighorn, 1876, during Nelson Miles's campaign, consolidated Army control on the plains. There, the Cheyenne, Algonquian speakers allied with the Lakota and Arapaho, faced displacement while striving to preserve rituals and kinship. The image shows Carlotta Chiwiwi and her daughters Maria and Felicita Tura, women of the Isleta Pueblo. Taken in the early 20th century and attributed to Poli in the U.S. Southwest at a time when New Mexico was shifting from territory to statehood, 1912. The framing highlights family ties and women's roles in Kiowa community life under assimilation policies. A photograph of young Hopi girls from Sikomovi on First Mesa, Arizona, taken by Frederick Monson in the early decades of the 20th century. The girls wear ceremonial clothes tied to the agricultural calendar and community rituals. The photo was taken during a phase of outside interventions and policies in the Southwest, revealing cultural persistence. In 1895, a young woman from Taos Pueblo in present-day New Mexico was photographed among adobe walls. Tools and marks of daily work suggest household routine, while the settlement, occupied for centuries by Kiwah speakers, recalls its place along the trade routes of the Upper Rio Grande. The multi-story dwellings highlight communal organization. In a photograph from 1892, a young Kiowa woman is shown in daily activity, integrated with her group. Her clothes combine beads, industrial fabrics, and local cuts, signaling exchanges with settlers and the plains trade circuits. Her focused expression and adornments point to youthful roles and ritual practices that shaped Kiowa life in the late 19th century. In this image, a Spokane woman is portrayed in 1897 by Frank LaRoche. Her clothing and adornments reflect Columbia Plateau traditions, blanket, glass beads, and basketry. The scene records a Pacific Northwest in transition, with railroads and markets expanding, while villages preserved rituals, gathering knowledge, and trade networks. A 1904 photograph in present-day New Mexico depicts the Corn Maiden, a mythical Pueblo figure. At the turn of the 20th century, the scene highlights corn as the basis of the diet, the regulator of the agricultural calendar, and the focus of offerings. The framing reveals the connection between myth, seasonal work, and community organization in the Southwest. In 1900, photographer Carl Everton Moon began a visual survey, traveling through native communities on their own lands. He produced records of daily life, work, rituals, landscapes, and oral traditions at the turn of the century, when westward expansion, railroads, and assimilation policies were rapidly transforming their world. A Taos Pueblo woman, photographed in the 1880s, then still in New Mexico territory. She wears dark wool, a shawl over her shoulders, turquoise necklaces, and a ritual hairstyle. In the background are adobe walls and communal courtyards. A wooden ladder, common for access to terraces, can be seen. The image shows a life structured by ceremonies, exchanges, and agricultural cycles with collective work. In the 1880s, Marcia Pascal, a woman of Cherokee descent and daughter of U.S. Army officer George Pascal, emerged in a time of transition. Her life crossed the post-Civil War era, when westward expansion, railroad growth, and new legal frameworks were reshaping Indian Territory and its mixed communities. In 1894, a Kiowa woman from the Southern Plains lived in what was then Indian Territory, today's Oklahoma. After the Plains Wars and new borders, her community faced economic and ritual reordering. Pressure for ranching and markets, missions and federal laws strained rituals, language, and kinship, once supported by regional alliances. In 1900, in the United States, a young Native woman was photographed in ceremonial dress of her nation. The scene comes at the turn of the 20th century, when Native peoples endured land loss, assimilation policies, and legal restrictions. Her clothing and adornments mark belonging and cultural continuity in the face of these pressures. A photograph from 1899 taken by Frank Reinhardt shows Hattie Tom, an Apache woman. The image is set at the end of the 19th century, when the American West was going through political and territorial reorganization. The framing, her posture, and her adornments reveal strategies of public presentation and cultural choices in the midst of new civil powers. Elsie Vance Chestuan, associated with the Chiricahua, is part of Apache history in the Southwest at the end of the 19th century. In the middle of army campaigns and forced relocations, her clans kept up kinship networks, alliances, and hunting and trade routes. Her name brings to mind imprisonment, removals, and constant contact with military posts along the U.S.-Mexico border. In the 1886 image, Lizzie Longwolf performs in Buffalo Bill's show, part of the Wild West tours. Her presence shows how these shows mixed riding demonstrations, shooting exhibitions, and choreographed numbers to give audiences a commercial version of the West and fix it in public memory, with performers taking on staged roles. A photograph from 1895 shows a young Hopi woman from the Pueblo people settled on the mesas of Arizona. Her clothing and ornaments signal belonging and stage of life. By the end of the 19th century, ties with the railroad, trade, and ethnographic research were intensifying, while seasonal rituals organized the collective calendar. In 1899, Frank Reinhardt photographed Hattie Tom, a Chiricahua Apache woman, during a series of photos for ethnographic exhibits. The portrait lets us look at her necklaces, earrings, braids, and fabrics, showing craft techniques and markers of belonging. The framing and pose point back to removals, reservations, and agreements after the Apache Wars. The 1886 image shows Isabel Perico Njadi, a Chiricahua Apache woman held as a prisoner of war. It comes at the close of the campaigns in the U.S. Southwest. After Geronimo's surrender came captures and deportations. Her figure records the impact of military advance and occupation policies on Native communities. Around 1900, a photograph shows Alice possibly linked to the Cayuse, Walla Walla, or Umatilla peoples of the Columbia Plateau. Her features, clothing, and adornments signal community ties. The context includes coercive treaties, removals to reservations, and assimilation policies in the Pacific Northwest with land loss and shifting leadership. Dated 1885, the photograph shows a young Comanche woman. Her parted hairstyle, glass beads, and industrial cloth point to craft techniques and trade networks in the southern Great Plains. The scene takes place after the collapse of the buffalo and the imposition of reservations, processes that reshaped mobility, clothing, and ways of survival. Dated 1900, the photograph shows a young Hopi woman on her wedding day in the villages of the Arizona Plateau. The rite links families and clans, confirms alliances and rights. Handmade clothing and shell and turquoise adornments show inherited crafts. The hairstyle and gifted fabrics mark the entry into adult life and collective continuity. In the 1886 photograph, Julie Nelson appears dressed in line with late 19th century urban conventions. A structured dress, pinned-up hair, and upright posture signal decorum and status in a context of industrialization and growing wage labor. Her steady gaze, matched to the slow lens of the studio, shows discipline and awareness of her own image. In 1895, George A. Addison painted Amy and Carrie Kiowa, portraying two women on Kiowa Island off the coast of South Carolina. In the post-Reconstruction period, when barrier islands balanced fishing and cotton, the scene highlights clothing, posture, and utensils, placing daily work in relation to tides and coastal routes with attention to materiality and environment. In the 1880s, young Comanche women were central to community life. They prepared food, set up camps, worked leather, and organized exchanges. They kept mobile networks tied to buffalo hunting and trade fairs. They passed on languages, songs, and rituals, regulating kinship and alliances, preserving cultural continuity on the plains.